A bad ending to a piece of media can really color the way people view that media from that point on. Endings are important, and a bad one can make people disregard the entire series. Game of Thrones, That 70s Show, Arrested Development, Attack on Titan, all of these are series that have more or less garnered a more negative reputation because of lackluster endings. For a more personal example, I recently finished Star vs. the Forces of Evil. And let me tell you, I would be lying if I said that the lackluster ending of that show hadn't made me think a bit lower of all the things that came before it. Especially when they wrote my two favorite characters out of the main plot on two separate occasions so they could push the obligatory main boy, main girl romance. However, with all that being said, the reverse can also apply. A good ending to an average piece of media, or even a bad piece of media, can really change how it's perceived. And this effect that I just described is what I think we are seeing with the conclusion to the longest running part in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, JoJolion. Hi everyone, I'm RVRocks, and part 8 of JoJo's was probably my favorite JoJo part that I've had the pleasure of experiencing. But now that it's past and over, I'm left to sit and wonder, was it good? Like, yeah, I love it, but if I've learned anything over the years, just because I like something doesn't mean that it's necessarily a good product. And well, with JoJolion, while I can confirm that yes, I do think it is an objectively good part, aside from the fact that objectivity is a myth, I think it's more apt to say that the part as a whole is a mixed bag. A mostly good mixed bag, but a mixed bag nonetheless. Like, in my opinion, the highs are some of the highest points in all of JoJo's. But the lows that bring the part down are just like the highs, some of the lowest points to grace the series. And you know what, just to hammer that point home, let's marathon through some of the highest highs and lowest lows of the part so you can see where I'm coming from. Positive number 1. I think there is no doubt from anyone who has read the part that JoJolion has some of the best character writing done by Hirohiko Araki. The main characters are some of the most defined to join a JoJo group, and the side characters are just as, if not more charming and deep. I personally love the characters of Joshu, Hato, Daya, and Carrera. Joshu being a thick-skinned, mostly clueless softie, just trying to do the best for his loved ones. Hato being mostly uninvolved and a pretty self-absorbed source of comic relief, but when she has her serious moments, you know some shit's about to happen in the plot. Daya has one of the most powerful stands in the series, only for it to make one appearance and get shrouded in the psyche of a clueless little girl. And Carrera just has one of the most fun arcs in the entirety of JoJolion, being a very much airheaded woman delivering you some of the most plot-heavy beats to come from the story at this point. But negative number 1, a lot of these characters never get a proper moment to shine. Hato and Daya are basically done being important the moment their individual arcs wrap up, despite what the manga would lead you to believe. Joshu does get a sort of redemption arc, starting off as a huge dick, but then later getting a slew of moments that let you humanize and really relate to the character. But when it finally seems like they're gonna give Joshu a moment to reflect on his prior shitty actions, they undercut this moment of retrospection with an immediate tonal shift, once again making Joshu the butt of a joke and making the community hate him again. And in my opinion, Carrera never really needed to return after she had her moment in the story, but then in her arc, they give a teaser of her returning at some point and it never comes to fruition. Like, I don't think anyone would have cared if she came back had she not said that she was going to. Anyways, positive number 2 of this part is its minor villains. A lot of enemies in Part 8 either facilitate really interesting fights, plot reveals, have a deep character, or all three, leading to a cast of minor villains that's just a couple steps below the magnum opus of JoJo villains, in my opinion, La Squadra. However, once again, negative number 2 is the minor villains. For every villain that has a deep motive, a cool fight, or excellent plot motivation, there is one that is just there to add another fight to the mix. For every Ojiro, a Blue Hawaii. For every Beetle tendency, an Aphex Brothers. You get the point. Positive number 3, the stand design is some of the coolest to come out of JoJo's. The sleek, almost robotic designs of a lot of the stands are awesome, and I love that so many of them just get plain weird with the designs. Paper Moon King, California King Bed, Dubiwa, Wonder of You, they all look so different from what anyone expects a stand to look like, and for that reason, I think they are some of the best. Negative number 3, the pacing of the story is all over the place. When I first got into JoJo back in early 2018, all my friends told me that Part 8 was the most whack part in all of JoJo's. And looking back, I can't disagree. So many story arcs in Part 8 are reminiscent of Part 4's Rock, Paper, Scissors arc, which is to say, a lot of uninteresting moments if you're not sold on the initial premise. Case in point, the aforementioned beetle tendency. I like this arc a lot, but in my first read, I was not sold on the initial premise of beetles fighting. And unfortunately for me, I had a lot of beetle fighting ahead of me. And just about every arc falls into this trapping, at least a little bit. Most arcs have some kind of repeating factor throughout the entire fight, and if you like these repeating factors, great. But if you don't, well, then you're kinda shit out of luck. So that was both a lot of complaining and praise for a JoJo part that I still think is my personal favorite, but hopefully now you can kind of see where I'm coming from. However, all of that was ignoring by far the biggest letdown in JoJolion for me, and that is the ending. And I know at the top of this video, I said that I thought a lot of people are forgiving some of these downsides because of JoJolion's great ending, and that's because this ending is both good and bad. That sounds confusing. Let me explain. JoJolion at its core was a story about a man struggling with his identity and a story about breaking a curse. However, they never fully deliver a satisfying ending on either of these fronts. Let's start with the identity crisis suffered by our main man, Josuke. Josuke starts out knowing nothing of his past, then about halfway through the part, he basically learns everything about his creation. Once Josuke knows his past and realizes that he is in fact his own person, this storyline takes a backseat for a moment, but it eventually realizes itself into him vowing to save the mother of Yoshikage Kira, Holy Joestar Kira. Except he doesn't really do that. Okay, so maybe rather than trying to preserve the family that he had in a past life, Josuke's priority would be to find a newfound family in his home with the Higashikados, and the ending of the part definitely leans in that direction. But in the final arc where everything should culminate, Josuke doesn't fight alongside the Higashikadas, instead getting help from the only other Kira we know of and his two friends. I would have liked if these two things took place at the same location, or at least closer together, because as it is right now, I feel like the only reason these two fights took place so far apart is so Paisley Park wouldn't be absolutely useless in the final battle. Josuke doesn't feel like he's solved any of his identity issues by the final pages, because at the end of the day, he doesn't really land on one concrete feeling. I am Josuke Higashikata. I am not Yoshikage Kira or Josefumi Kujo. But Holy is my mom, and this other lady is also kind of my mom, and the Higashikadas are my actual found family. There were a few directions that this story could have gone, but it feels like they're trying to have Josuke pick a cake and eat it too. The final pages of the story, the last time we're gonna see these characters in their current state, doesn't have Josuke land on a decision. So in this moment, I'd like to remember the immortal words of Ron Swanson. Don't half-ass two things, whole-ass one thing. They should have committed a little harder to one side of the storyline instead of leaving it as it is currently. Like, oops, with no more Rokakaka, we just secured the deaths of 3 people. I don't know, is it pushing to want a little more than that from this plotline? Speaking of wanting more from a plotline, let's talk about the second, arguably more important thing here. They don't break the curse! Well, okay, it's not really clear whether or not they actually broke the curse. Yasuo's narration says that the curse is broken, but really all they do is the same thing that Kato did for Jobin, except replace a random bully kid with a random bully rock kid. That's another thing. This moment does not feel like a final boss. Toru was not built up to in the same way that Dio, Cars, Dio, Kira, Diavolo, Pucci, or President Valentine were. And maybe you could be saying, he's not meant to be the final boss. There is no final boss of JoJolion. But if he's not meant to be the final boss, then why are the last 20 to 30 chapters of the part focused on fighting him? Long story short, Toru needed more gravitas, because he feels much more fitting of the role characters like Steely Dan or Chocolata have, and not something akin to an actual main villain. It's just so weird because most JoJo parts set themselves out with one main goal. Defeat Dio, escape from prison, overthrow the Mafia. And that gives you a through line for the part, knowing that whatever happens throughout the story, all of it is basically in service of that one goal. And the result of that main goal is the payoff to the story. In part 1, you're given a clear goal of defeat Dio. However, Jonathan fails that goal and dies. The payoff of this part is the tragedy of Jonathan's story. And then in part 3, you're given a clear goal of defeat Dio yet again. Jotaro succeeds in that goal, and the payoff is victorious. You get to see Jotaro win, and to a lesser extent, you get to see Jonathan finally win. Now let's look at part 7. You're given two main goals just like in Part 8. Johnny wants to walk again, Gyro wants to win the Steel Ball Run race. Similarly to Part 1, Gyro loses his goal, and well, his life, but Johnny achieves his, finally being able to walk again. And the culmination of these two goals informs Johnny's decisions at the end of the part, paying off with a bittersweet but optimistic ending. Part 8 doesn't really give you a clear, and that's it, to any of its plot lines, and that blows. The ending showing everyone together, simultaneously grieving, but feeling a twinge of hope and optimism for the future, it's such a satisfying page. In fact, everything after the Radio Gaga incident is in theory a great conclusion to JoJolion. But it's a great conclusion and a payoff to a story we didn't end up getting. And that's not even mentioning stuff like the countdown to the new Rokakaka and the flash forward. Unlike other parts that have plot lines people say Araki forgot about, Part 8 actually has plot lines that don't go anywhere. A flash forward to an event that doesn't happen nor is ever referenced. The fact that Kato disappears for half the part despite saying she's gonna take back the life she's lost. The fact that the man who appears in Josuke's memories never returns or is even mentioned despite Josuke's lack of memory being the driving force for the plot, and that is the one thing that Josuke seems to remember. Although I am willing to accept that one as this guy being a beta design for Tamaki Demo. All of the other JoJo parts, regardless of individual quality, are complete stories. But JoJolion feels like it's missing something. Personally, I am hoping that Part 9 will be a direct sequel with a similar cast of characters going to a new location, something akin to a Stardust Crusaders type plot. But at this rate, I'm not even sure if that's logical thinking or just desperate praying that this part will somehow fix all of these plot holes that have appeared throughout JoJolion. One thing is for sure though, JoJolion is my favorite JoJo part, but I can't ignore the fact that now that it's over, JoJolion's ending is disappointing. And if you think that me not having a large audience is disappointing, then why don't you subscribe to RVRocks and ring the bell, like this video, and comment your thoughts on JoJolion. I actually have no idea if this is a hot take in the JoJo space or not, so please actually comment your thoughts down below and I will lovingly reply to all of them. If you don't feel like commenting, then don't be afraid to contact me over at my Twitter, at RVRocks. Also, if Jim or Sam from Jokakaka stumble upon this video, if you perhaps wanted to have this little RV on that fancy podcast of yours to talk about JoJolion, I would not complain. Senseless self-promotion and shot shooting aside, before you do any of that, I have been RVRocks and thank you so much for watching. See ya!